Okay, got the stream starting up. So for anybody that's already in here hanging out, just give me 1 second here. Just want to make sure the strength of the connection looks good. Just letting it update on YouTube real quick. Nice. I think we're cooking. Cool. All right, guys. So for anybody that's already joining us here, this is the Shading and Lighting 1 Week 2 live stream. So we got a bunch of really cool things we're going to be talking about this week. Let's bring up the activity here so you can check all this stuff out. If you guys do join in, feel free to pop into the chat. Let me know you're here. Or you might be watching the recording of this the next day. But yeah, we are into week 2. It's only our second week using Maya, but what we did in the last project was basically just do a bunch of Maya project sets, going over folder structures, how to set up projects, where to put your scene file, and there are a lot of other kind of random things that we were doing on top of that, like using groups, display layers, importing assets. It was quite a bit actually of different things we kind of covered, and I've left everyone a really pretty detailed critique on your submissions there, so you can definitely check that out if you want more feedback on how you've done. If you have any questions about that 2.1 activity, feel free to reach out. Hey, we got some people already hanging out. Hey, Jessica. Hey, Cristobal. Welcome to the party. And we got Justin. Oh, man. We are setting some records here. We got 3 people. Love it. How you guys doing tonight? It's probably been pretty crazy for you guys. Like, you're a week into using Maya, and you've already actually had to do quite a bit here. So yeah, for this one, this is actually a really exciting activity for you guys because we finally get to jump into RenderMan. And I love RenderMan. I've actually had some questions about RenderMan already because I think a couple of you have probably noticed in some of my videos, like you've probably seen RenderMan pop up in like the render settings, or you've maybe you've heard me talk about it. There's also a RenderMan shelf that shows up in a lot of my videos, and most of you don't have RenderMan yet, unless you've jumped into the activity today and already installed it. But I'm not going to bore you with going through any of the videos. This one's actually really cool, by the way, if you guys haven't watched this one yet. It's it's kind of a corny way to present it, but this does walk you through the basic idea on how renders are created. Yeah, Yeah, I totally agree with you, Justin. And I still love 2D, and I think some of the best artwork really is when you find like that perfect marriage between both. Because it's not like all 2D is never used with 3D stuff. You're gonna end up creating textures in the next shading and lighting class. So you guys will be back in Photoshop. We're gonna go over a bunch of different ways to do different texture effects, like finding reference, making textures tileable. We're going to be doing normal maps and like different types of like color maps and roughness maps, all these fancy things you probably don't know about. But we're taking our 2D knowledge from the previous class, putting this inside of RenderMan to create these really believable 3D assets. The texturing stuff is super fun. And actually, one thing, I'm jumping way ahead here, so I apologize. But one thing I am really stoked about you guys seeing, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot because any chance I can get to talk about Painter, I will do it. At the end of the second shading and lighting class, I'm going to have you guys install Substance Painter. We'll just continue anyway. I don't know if you guys have used Painter before. For anyone here that's hanging out with me, have you used Painter? Oh, there's been an update. We'll do that later. But if you haven't used Substance Painter before, this thing is super sweet. Let me find something here that we've worked on. What is this? This actually... Oh, I've already deleted that file. Let me find a different one here. I think It's probably this. Let's try this out. Older version of Painter, because it's updated, that's fine. It should probably still open. Let's see if this works. So this is Painter. So, speaking of finding that cool bridge between Photoshop and 3D softwares like Maya, this is it. Painter is kind of interesting because it has a lot of the same functionality that you guys are used to with Photoshop. Like, actually, if you look over here in the top right, you can see layers, right? And you guys have probably used grouping before in Photoshop. You understand how layers stack together. Well, this is basically like Photoshop on steroids. The cool thing about this is you're literally painting right on the surface. So in this example, you're going to get all this actually at the end of the second month. Um, but I kind of have a little crate here I did where I'm like layering different rust effects on top of it. I'm putting in dust on the top of the surface. We have dirt building up in some of the corners. I've done some different painting for the vents. I don't see that changing. Where are my vents? No clue where the vents are. That actually might be a dead layer. Um, but it's very, very similar to Photoshop. The main difference here is when you're using something like Painter, we start getting into other types of material properties. So imagine we're looking at a surface and we're trying to imagine like how the light interacts with it. And I'm sure most of you looking at any surface, even in front of you right now, if you look at your desk, I'm looking at my laptop currently. It has that dark gray color, right? But if you really start thinking about what's going on with the surface of our laptop, it's it's gray, but what else is happening? There's also oil and like finger smudges on it, right? Like if I use my laptop the entire day and my hands resting on it, that poor left corner of the laptop starts to look disgusting. I have like little fingerprints and I might have like smudges. You might have a couple scratches. There's a surface property that can recreate that. And so if you look at a material like this crate, you can tell it's fairly shiny in a lot of areas. And I want to show you what some of the individual maps look like. So uh, this is base color. So this is probably what most people identify first as like the very first material property they get. Everyone knows what base color is. Base color is your basic color on anything. On the laptop, it's the gray. If you look at your keys, it's the gray keys and the little like white letters, printed on the keys as well. Uh, if you're wearing your shirt, whatever the pattern is on the shirt, that's base color. But it's a lot more than that going on with the material. There's also roughness. And roughness is a different type of texture. You can tell it's black and white. But what's roughness going to do? By the way, on the right here, this is the 2D texture. So even though we're seeing it in 3D, you still have to remember that textures are two-dimensional. So we're seeing the 2D version of the textures we're creating, but you're getting immediate feedback and viewing that on a three-dimensional object. But a roughness map is how blurry or rough the surface is and how that affects light. So if something's not very rough, which would be the darker sections, if you look at the light, see how all those areas right here where it was dark, let me go back, are very shiny. But if you look at the top, so that's a much lighter color with roughness. Look at what happens with the light there. See how it looks very dry and kind of matte, and you can see these little pockets where it's very shiny underneath. So look at that roughness map again. The shiny parts are where it's darker roughness. So you're actually defining the physical property of what that material feels like, because how the rougher the surface is, the more it scatters the light. If it's a very smooth surface, like a polished mirror, a lot of metals, glass, those tend to be very sharp, and you get mirror like qualities back. So we got roughness, there's metallic maps. We're not going to spend too much time with going over all these. We'll talk about normal maps. This is the kind of the big one here that's making that crate look like there's all these little like cracks and dents in it. That is from the normal map. So it's sort of faking these small variations. Really cool stuff. That's just a mask that happens to be on this particular layer right here. Have you guys used masking very much in Photoshop? That's always kind of a weird one where I use masking all the time. I just wasn't sure how much masking you guys have used in Photoshop before. 'Cause I'm sure most of the time you're in that software previously, it was really just getting comfortable with brushes and layers. But if you have used masking in Photoshop, this is very, very similar to that. Masking, if you've never used it before, is extremely powerful. And this is basically the only way I paint textures at this point. Uh, but yeah, like in Painter, like if you wanted to, we could totally go in here and just hop to a different one. I'll just throw a preset on something. Everyone loves presets. We don't have to do any thinking. Uh, cool. Wooden olive. Let's do that. There we go. There is a material preset. We'll do plastic on something. Let's just throw that over on here. That's kind of a cool braided plastic. I like that one. Wood rough. Why not? Let's find a, actually, let's do a smart material and replace the crate real quick. Uh, come on. Come on, Painter. You can do it. I don't know why it's not swapping over for me. Let's drop, let's actually get rid of all this for a second. Goodbye. We're going to put on a new hull damage material on here. This ought to be interesting. I have no clue what this is going to look like. Give it a second. Or we won't get it. That's a little odd. Oh, I wonder if I didn't bake my mesh maps. Actually, that might be why it's not working. You know what? We're not going to worry about that right now. That's a whole other. I'm getting way too deep. I'm getting excited about Painter and about to jump into a whole 30-minute lecture about a software you won't even be using this month. But all I need to know is Painter is amazing. We love Substance, and you will be very excited to use it later. Yeah, it's awesome. Um, yeah, so I think next month with you guys, when you get the shitty lighting too, I'll probably spend a lot more time going over mask with you in the second week when we're doing a lot of texturing, because I have a ton of different techniques I use to paint masking. But really, at the heart of it, all a mask is a black and white alpha. So if you've seen alphas before, like white is visible, black's not visible, you probably already kind of know what masking is doing. You're just controlling where you see something. But you can put it on per layers. So that's how I built the crate. Like I basically started with metal, and then I start putting in layers of paint on top of it, and I control where I see the paint, and then I erode away the paint, and then I'm like, all right, well, on top of the paint, I also want dirt, and then I want dust, and I want like an oil splatter. Yep. But anyway, back back to reality with what we're doing. We're not doing Painter. As much as I love it, we are doing something equally as awesome called RenderMan. So what you guys are going to be doing probably today or tomorrow, whenever you get a chance to get into 2.2, is you're going to go through the process of downloading and installing RenderMan. It's not too difficult. The videos will walk you through it. I also have pretty decent information in the documentation as far as using the links to get to RenderMan's forum and creating your account. Basically, what you're doing is you're just registering on their forum to make an account. You're going to download the RenderMan plugin for Maya, and it's free. You're not paying for any of this. It's non-commercial. It's free for educational use, and this, as far as I know, it's going to be like that forever. So even after you guys are done, with the LA Film School, if you're still just practicing with RenderMan and not making any money, you can still use the license. So it is free. Um, but eventually, when you go through all this installation, you'll see how to go into Maya's plugin manager, how to enable RenderMan, and eventually, what's going to happen is when you get through all of this. Oh, we've got actually we have one of RenderMan's big boys in here. David Hackett's hanging out with us in the live stream. Feel free to say hi, David. David does a lot of the documentation for RenderMan. So eventually, when you guys install it, and you're going through all their pretty help docs, this is the guy that made those documents look oh so beautiful. um, so down here we have the shelf. We're going to go over that, and then we're going to run a couple simple scenarios here with what you're going to do with the second activity. So really, this is all about you guys producing your very first renders, a monumental moment in your education. And then at the end of the day, 2.2, all you're doing is submitting a couple renders, really just proving to me that you have installed RenderMan, it clearly works, you're making images, you've gone through some very basic steps to produce different types of images, and then you're good. And the other activity in the week, we're probably not going to spend much time with this. We do have one that goes over batch rendering, and I have a project set up for you guys with this. But batch rendering is basically just us taking an animated sequence, like an animated camera, and you're going to be turning that into an image sequence. And so eventually you're going to bring those images into Nuke and you're going to convert that to a video. So here's 2.3. A lot of downloading, going into RenderMan settings, setting the preview quality to draft so it doesn't take you guys 18 years to render it. Starting the batch render, bringing images into Nuke. Nuke's another really awesome software you guys will be using a bit this month and in Shading and Lighting too. Love node editing. So I'm a big fan of Nuke. Then you're writing out a video. The video is not going to be the most pretty thing because our render settings are going to be very low, but it's really just to make sure that you understand how to make a video. So for later on, when you guys start getting into your animation classes, you start, doing run cycles or you're doing character interaction or dialogue, you at least have the knowledge to be able to go in there and turn that to a movie. So let's get in here and do this. So we're skipping past the boring stuff. I've already got RenderMan installed, and so currently what I'm using is RenderMan 22.6, and you'll know that it's working because as soon as you turn on the plugin, you're going to see a RenderMan tab appear on the shelf. We have all these gorgeous buttons, and what I want you to kind of notice here is that you'll see some of the buttons have little arrows in the corner, and others do not. And what that's basically telling you is that any of these that have the arrow where it says right click for options, if you right click, there are tools in this icon. It's almost these are like sort of it's like a sub menu within that one icon right there. So different types of light sources, whether they're a rectangular shape, spherical, distant light. We have materials over here. We'll be using these a lot in the second class, and some other really fun stuff like the Pixar volume. I'll probably be showing you guys this thing next week when we get to lighting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the vehicle project, since that's what you guys will be doing 2.2 with, and we're going to play around with that a little bit. All right, so give me one moment here. Let's grab this guy, throw him on the desktop. The desktop, the dumping ground for everything. Okay, we got that on there. So I've just copied this over. There's that pesky character project that keeps popping up. Yeah, we'll have to move that. I got the vehicle project in here. So what I'm going to do is set the project first. So I've already gone over this with a couple of you guys in the 2.1 critique, but how do we set the project? Well, we always want to make sure we're opening Maya first, right? And then what we need to do is go to File. And I know I was showing you the set project thing down here, but I was showing a lot of you in the critique a way faster way to do this. But we always want to set our project first before we ever open that Maya file. What I think most of you are going to start doing to speed up your workflow is using this button here, or better yet, what if we used hotkeys? We all love hotkeys. So Control O, your standard open hotkey in pretty much every software. So Control O is going to go to open. Now when this opens up, this is where you could start clicking on Maya files, but remember, we still want to set the project first. But you'll notice in the bottom corner of the open window, what could we get? Set project. This is going to pop open the same set project window that you guys saw here. It's exactly the same thing, but by using a hotkey, you're able to get to it faster. And now I can click on the vehicle projects root folder, not any of these, because that'll actually create a whole new set of project folders inside of another one. But you just click on the root folder, set, and I want you guys to look what happens at the top right here in the open menu. See how it just shifted over? As soon as we set it, you can see the open menu immediately responds, and it's like, oh, that's where you wanted to work from. Yes, it was the vehicle project. We're going to go into scenes, and good Lord, I have quite a few files in here. And I don't know which one's which. Well, we're going to open this up and hope for the best. Let's find out what we've got. I have no clue if this is the right one. I clearly have not planned this out very well. Oh my God, I found the right file. First shot. It's almost like I've done this lecture before. So I've opened up the file, and this is probably actually where you guys are at. You'll notice like the wheels have already been turned over here, like 15 degrees. We've got our camera set up. So if I look through the cameras, here's my front, side. Uh, Most of you had a few issues with the clipping plane. So if you do have an issue with the clipping plane, just check your critique on how to fix that. So the background does show up, but a couple of you had an issue where the background was basically missing because the camera couldn't see far enough. And what I want you to notice is in this file, if you look over here, actually, yours is a little bit different because I think, yep, okay, actually, your scene file is a little bit different. There's a display layer in yours, I think that says something like Pixar Lights. I don't know if anyone has that Maya file open yet, the vehicle one. If you do, you can probably verify that for me, but I'm almost positive there's a display layer down here called Pixar Lights. And if you turn it on and off, it'll make these visible. I'm going to put them on there real quick myself because for some reason this version of the file doesn't have that. Let's just, I could be wrong here. I might have these mixed up. We're just making a display layer for the lights. So the lights have been in your vehicle project the whole time. You've probably noticed them, but they weren't really doing anything because these are RenderMan lights. And up until today, you guys haven't used RenderMan. So these wouldn't have done anything anyway, even if you did somehow try to render the scene. But we have RenderMan running. Now I'm going to back up even more. And you can see that we're in this little punch bowl. Right, so we're seeing through the back side of this to the scene. I'm going to turn the lights layer off for a second. Hopefully you guys like the display layer thing, by the way, because this is super handy being able to control groups of objects visibility. But with the environment light, let's back this up. Actually, I'm going to bring in a new one because this is not here in yours. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to delete the environment. Actually, I'll leave the environment light layer. What you guys are doing is creating an environment light through RenderMan's preset browser. So let's start off with the very first one. We're going to make, our very first render. All right. So the first one we need to make, I know this is kind of tiny. We are doing this guy, the wireframe render. We're going to open Maya. We've done all this stuff. We're going to change the integrator to Pixar Visualizer and see if we can get this thing to create. So a wireframe render, it's just really just a nice way to quickly show off the detail of the geometry. So you can kind of see the edges, the way this was modeled, the density of the mesh. It's going to be really good for you guys to get into like character modeling or environment modeling, especially if you're doing it with games and you're really concerned about showing off how dense something is to make sure this asset is maybe light enough to work in a particular game engine. So how do we make this image? So what I'm going to do is go into the render settings real quick. So the render settings are right up here. This is the same area that you guys were doing all of your camera stuff. And when you were doing your camera stuff, I bet you noticed in the video that this whole section looked different for you compared to mine. So mine says RenderMan because I have it installed. You guys might be seeing Maya Software or Arnold showing up as default. So one of your first steps is to immediately change this over to RenderMan once the plugin's running. That will change all these settings in the second tab over here. So we're going to skip past all this because you're probably pretty comfortable with the camera resolution. Let's go over here to RenderMan. And we have a bunch of other tabs inside of this. We have arbitrary output variables, which is a mouthful, or AOVs. AOVs are basically what breaks up what's called our beauty render into different pieces. So back in Painter, you know how I was showing you guys all those different maps like base color, roughness, normal maps. It's sort of like that. It's not really like a texture effect, but you're taking a full image of all the detail from the lights, the materials, the geometry, and you're splitting it into much simpler things like here's just the color information, here's just the bounced light, here is the specular highlight, this is the effect of glass and what's behind the glass, like transparency or transmissions. It's basically breaking up the color image into the different parts that make it up. We're going to start here with sampling, and it's a little math heavy. We're not really expecting you guys to know how all this works, like the ins and outs of how samples are calculated. I really just want you guys to know what these are and how we produce quicker renders and how we produce cleaner renders that are going to take a little bit longer. So we have sample settings up here. We have IPR samples, which we'll talk about. I have an integrator. This is a big part of this activity because we have to change this to get the wireframe thing to work. And then down here, we have some other settings that sort of relate to the quality of the image. And then farther down here, we have trace depth. We're not going to worry too much about this right now, but this will pop up a lot more when we get to the Shading and Lighting 2 class. So we're going to come back in here a little bit, but let's try doing our first image. So what I'm going to do is, what are you guys feeling here out of the two? Front, side? I might do the side one because I kind of like that little accent light back here. I'm going to use the side render. And there's a couple ways to do an image. And I'm going to let you guys pick your poison on how you prefer to do your images. But the main idea is we want to produce very quick feedback of what this render is doing. So we can either turn Maya's viewport itself into the render, or we can choose to use something called the image tool. So over here on the top left of that shelf, you're going to see we have a bunch of buttons. And I'm going to click this third one in, which is very confusing, by the way, which is open it. It is not just me being extremely vague about something. It stands for image tool. And I really think, and maybe David, you can verify this for me, but was this almost like a joke when, when the people at RenderMan came up with this, naming it the image tool, and then realizing we could just call it, and having everyone be very confused because they don't know what the hell they're talking about? But the it is the image tool. So when you hear me refer to it, I'm referring to this big window right here. Now, when you open this thing up for the first time, it will probably not look like this. There's a bunch of different pieces in here. Actually, you know what? Let me just turn on the lights because I do want you guys to see what this looks like when I create a render. Instead of me just opening the window up and staring at nothing, instead what I'm going to do is hit this button on the left. And you'll notice, oh man, look at this. We're getting feedback already. It's that easy, folks. We've already got a render. Isn't this incredible? I'm just going to scale out the window here for a little bit. Now, the manipulation, how you move around in here is a little weird because in Maya and in Photoshop, I know you guys are used to using certain hotkeys, like spacebar in Photoshop is the hand tool, and you can use that to pan around the canvas. Nuke, you use Alt left click to move around. Maya's got its own Alt left, middle, right mouse buttons to do all sorts of other 3D movement. This one's a little different. The movement tool, the movement option is actually a tool you have to turn on called pan. So if this button is turned blue, these are all different buttons, by the way. This is a zoom. If you just click anywhere with the left mouse button, you are already panning around the image. And you can middle mouse wheel in and out. That's also what the zoom tool does. We have cropping to isolate regions to render to make it faster. A bunch of other things here where I can select objects through the render here and click on like that part of the image. It'll select the door. I don't really use those a whole lot, but they're there. Let's just kill the image for a second. So I'm going to cancel the render. And I want you guys to notice something, by the way. Look at the bottom left corner. I'm not sure if you guys have been catching what's going on. See that little percentage? That's how far through the render it is. We're 7% in that image. And you might be wondering, why are we only 7% through this render? Because it looks like it's done, right? Let me zoom in and you will see why. Let's get really close. Actually, let's do a 1-to-1. I'll probably have to go actually a lot closer than that. So look at the detail here. See all these little dots everywhere? That is why the render is not done. So it's weird because you would think it's this immediate calculation. We're sort of doing this thing called brute force rendering. Really what we're doing is just throwing a crap ton of calculations at the render, and we're just letting it chew through calculation after calculation for every pixel, and that's what you're seeing it do actually at the moment. Let me put the render settings again. Not the IPR. Oh no. Hope that's not good. Oh, we've done it. I totally just started a brand new render. Oh, hold please. Stop it. Stop IPR. I'm gonna delete these real quick. Let's do this one more time. My bad. Hit the wrong button. Let's open up the render settings, and I want you to kind of notice this whole min-max samples thing over here. Remember how I was saying this is sort of how we calculate the image? So we have a range from 0 to 256. What you're seeing is when we started, this little spiraling effect where it's starting from the center and kind of gradiating out to the edge, though that is actually RenderMan going through the different passes of it wiping through one sample after another. So it's sort of like I don't know how many times it's wiped through this at this point, maybe 8 or 9, but we'll say it's like the 9th sample, and it goes all the way to the edge, and now it's the 10th sample, and look at what this is going to go up to. You read that right, 256. So it will do 256 passes potentially. It's not always going to go that high. There's some other things that go on in here that will cut it off, but it could go up to 256 times. Then it will calculate pixels until it has a clean render. So it's a lot. Yes. Yes, it is. It is approximating it. Yes, it's actually a really good way to think about it. Um, and if you zoom in, you really actually I can't get any closer here. That's probably a hotkey to zoom in Windows that I don't know about yet. I used to be able to do it with Command on my Mac, but I'll have to look that up on Windows. But you guys know how like every image is made up of all these little tiny pixels? Well, each one of those pixels, I wish I could get closer so you could see it. And you actually can see how big these like tiles are where the samples are wiping across. Um, but each little pixel is made up of a lot of samples inside of it. So when it goes through the pass, imagine it adding like one little dot in there, and each little dot is in a different location. And so one of those squares, which I wish I could get closer to it, but one of those little pixel squares potentially could have 256 individual dots inside of it. And each one of those 256 dots is trying to calculate what does the light look like? What is the shader? What is the color? What's the reflection? What's behind the vehicle on the edge? What is the transmissions? What's the shadow quality? It's going through everything possible that's happening in this scene to figure out what the color of that pixel is supposed to look like. And then you start thinking about it like, all right, well, it's a 1280 by 720. So if you multiply those two numbers together, we could, you know what, let's do this because we're going to get very depressing here. We're going to find out how many pixels make up the image. So 1280 by 720. Oh my God. We have 921,600 pixels in the entire image. And all those pixels now have up to 256 calculations. And I'm sure your head is starting to hurt a little bit just thinking about math. I don't mind math, but it can be terrifying. It almost gives you more appreciation for what this poor renderer is doing. It is just chewing through a very, very intense calculations at actually like a ludicrous speed pace, if I dare say so myself. It's a good Spaceballs reference, by the way. So it's going through this thing at an incredible pace and adding probably what's going to end up being millions and millions of samples, maybe in some cases billions, to calculate the entire image. That's why these renders take quite a while. It's a lot of math, a lot of calculating. So what we're going to do is kind of go over some ways to optimize this a little bit for you guys, so you're not always waiting for a long render. Now, at the end of the day, for the turn-ins, yes, for 90% of the turn-ins you do for every class, you're producing a clean render. But you don't want to be waiting on this every time you're like, I want to make the light a little bit brighter. I want to make the car paint a different color. Because that means you're waiting, 20 minutes to get feedback, realize the red's too dark, you change it, and then you're waiting 20 minutes again. It's ridiculous. So what we're going to do is hit escape. And I want to show you guys a couple things that make up the image tool, and then we're going to start optimizing this to be a little bit more efficient. So when you get inside the image tool here, regardless if a render is running, if there's no render, I want you to be aware of all the different parts that make this thing up. And I have some hidden right now, and you'll notice a lot of these have hotkeys. The big one here that I think all of you will want to at least be aware of is this thing called window always on top. It's very important. So window always on top also has the shortcut of T. I'll hit T. So T. You can see something flashed. We'll hit T again. It's doing something. If this is off, and so you've hit T and you've turned it off, and it's off by default, when I click back in Maya, watch what happens. Right? So imagine if you're working on something and I'm changing the color of the paint job, and I'm like, all right, I got to click on the car body to access the attributes for the paint. Like, oh, well, where the hell did the render go? And you pick it up. You're like, okay, I got the render back. Let me click back over. And damn it. Pardon my language. But it keeps losing the window, right? And that's going to be very frustrating. So window always on top is actually doing exactly what it sounds like. This window is always on top. So if you click back in Maya, you don't lose the window. So this is probably more important for those of you that only have your one laptop monitor. I have a dual monitor. You guys can't see it, but next to my laptop, I have a whole other much larger monitor. And so what I will do oftentimes is if this is off, I'll just throw it on the other monitor off the screen. Oh, I just lost Maya. I'll throw it on the other monitor off the screen. And what that'll allow me to do, oops, is see the render on my other monitor, and I still have my full screen of Maya to continue working. Oops, put this over here. There we go. But for most of you, if you don't have the second monitor or the luxury of that, if you keep this on, this means you could probably scale the window down a little bit. We're just going to zoom back. Let's just minimize that. And I could keep it here, click on the attributes. And now if I go to the car body, and eventually we'll talk about shaders and do something with this, I can start changing settings and watch that paint update right in the render view. Okay, so that's window always on top. I'll let you guys choose how you prefer to use it. You like it always visible? You can still minimize it if you want to, of course, but you'll kind of figure that out when you start using it. Pixel readouts down at the bottom. It's really hard to read this, but it says RGBA luminance, some color space settings. You can see the little XY numbers changing in the bottom corner. That just tells you what pixel you're looking at. So pixel 00 is in the bottom corner here, at least I thought it was. Oh, that's weird. It's the top left. I didn't actually realize that until now. So the top left is 00, and down here would be the last pixel, which is 1280 and 720. We also have like little values of like RGB. It's kind of handy if you want to have that on. Image tools is the whole top part right here. Those I would definitely leave visible because you're probably going to use these quite a bit. And we also have the catalog. And the catalog I usually have open if I want to go between different images. And I'll show you a couple of reasons why we may want to do this in a little bit. The other one that I don't have open is, I don't think you can. I have never been able to get this to work. I haven't tried it in a while, though. I don't know if this will actually pop. No, because it's a RenderMan window. It's not really going to pop anywhere in Maya because I have that padlock turned off. This is how you guys were breaking the interface. And actually, maybe, David, you could answer this one. Is there a way to get this window to integrate itself into Maya? I know we can use the viewport, but have you run into a way to do that? There's a little bit of a lag, so I'm not going to. There's a little bit of a latency, by the way. So when you guys hear what I'm saying and when I see what you guys are typing back, it's about a 10 to 15-second delay. Yeah. Yep. So at the moment, no. But you'll see why it's not important in a little bit when we start talking about this beauty right here in the viewport. So this will change your world here in a second. And the other thing we haven't shown is the inspector. And this one I don't use all the time, but it is really handy. So I'm sure a bunch of you like to leave notes on changes you're making. Like, well, I guess you wouldn't really know this yet because you're still new to Maya, but eventually when you start doing these renders and you're changing so many settings, like I'm using 256 samples on this one, and you're just checking the quality. This other render is 512. This other render is 512 with different light settings. It becomes a little overwhelming at times to keep track of which image is doing which settings. But what the inspector is going to let you do is treat this like a notepad, where you could put in a bunch of information for every single image you create. So, for example, like I'm going to make this render look absolutely terrible, and we're going to make a note of that in the inspector. So let's just hit I to close it. We'll close the catalog too, which is C. So we're just hitting those little hotkeys right there. Let's also scale that in to make it a bit smaller. What I'm going to do is say max samples is going to be 2. This is going to be a terrible looking image. And I'm just going to start the render again. I can also do that by hitting R. So R will just force the render to redo whatever the last camera position was. So we're going to hit R. And here's sample 1. Look at that percentage flying through it. And we're on sample 2. And it's done. It's like, oh, you went through both samples, max of 2, and you've created the most beautiful render you've ever done in your life. And darn was it fast. So this is now a 2-sample render, but I may want to make a note of this, that this was a 2-sample render. So if I go to hit I and load the inspector, I can see the render time because it finished. But I may go down here and be like, all right, notes. I'm just typing like we would in any text document. Max samples equals 2. And then I might put render looks terrible, might get fired from job. So we produced the worst render we've ever seen. The client thinks this is terrible, and we have made a note of that it's not looking good for us. So we're going to bump this up and try something else out. So if I go over here and say like we're going to go to 4, this is not going to be much of an improvement. We'll hit R again. I think you guys already get the idea with what's going on here. And if I look at the catalog, you can see I have it's almost keeping a log of every time I start a render. We can delete these first two actually, but it'll eventually finish. We're going to get that same render time. You'll see it's gone up. So it's done right there. 19 seconds. And it was about double the time because we had doubled the samples. Amazing. It's almost like the math works. And I could do the same thing, go into this, leave my notes, 4 samples, not sure if the client's going to be any happier, and we're going to start looking for a better job. So we'll put it back to 256. I think you guys kind of get the idea. You can leave notes in there. If you're not really into keeping track of notes and monitoring render times, which you probably don't honestly need to do a whole lot until you get much deeper into like your portfolio projects, but it's there if you ever need it. You can just hit I to close it. And if you don't ever even use you're going to be using the catalog because you're going to have so many renders that you're creating that you almost will always need to be going through here. But remember, you can always use C to collapse it if you don't like it taking up so much space. All right. How you guys feeling so far? We're blowing through information here. So that's the image tool. Now I want to show you a couple other ways we can use the image tool that's a little better for what we're doing because we want to get feedback. And you know how every time, actually, you know what? I'm going to show you something. I'm going to start a render and I want you to see what happens when I change a light. So let's hit R again. And I can also hit that R right there, by the way, to start the render. We're going to hit R. Let this thing go. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to click on this light in the back. I'm just selecting it through the outliner, but I'm clicking on, whoops, where is it? Not rim. Is it back? Oh, the backlight. There it is. Oh, that's that orange kicker light behind the rear wheels. So I'm just clicking on a light. Okay, we're going to go into the attribute editor. You can see, because I have a light selected, we're getting some information on that. We can see intensity, exposure. I just really want to change the color temperature. We'll talk about what this means in. Actually, let's turn off the temperature and pick a color. So we're going to remove color temperature. And what that's supposed to do is change the color. It's not using kelvins anymore. You're like, all right, that's weird. I don't see it changing. Well, let's go to color, and we're going to do something really weird. I'm going to say, I want that to be a pink light. And I'm definitely you can see that light's highlighting back there. I'm changing it. Why is it not updating? Because when you initiate that render, you're sort of already converting your scene information into RenderMan's format where it started the render and it doesn't know that it has to redo any calculations. It took whatever you gave it when you hit that button and it's going to ride that off into the sunset until that thing's finished. What we want to do is get feedback, right? Because we want to change these colors and watch if that's going to give us the right look. So I'm going to use Control Z and let's kind of back up a little bit. So we have all this, come on, there we go. We'll turn that back on. I have no clue if that was the setting I had, but we're going to go with it. Let's kill the render. I'm going to use this other button next to it called IPR. Now, back in the render settings, you guys probably remember hearing that because when I was going through this stuff earlier, I kind of briefly mentioned this little IPR section, and you'll notice it has its own set of samples. It's not nearly as detailed. It only has a back sample and pixel variants, but you'll notice that the numbers are different. So what's an IPR and how is that different from the top part? Well, check this out. I'm going to start an IPR render. Now this one, if I hit it, it will launch. If you right click on the IPR one, there are a few more options we get that don't appear with this one. Where I could do specific objects that I select. I can choose my camera. Normally, by default, it's going to choose whatever camera is your active camera in the viewport. Which you want to be careful about, by the way, because I know a lot of you are using that split view because I use it all the time, and you're probably going to pick that up by habit. But depending on what viewer you're actively in, that will determine which one of these is going to occur by default. So we're getting the side view because currently we're looking through the side camera. But with IPR, I could, if I wanted to, be looking through the side camera, or better yet, I could decide like I want to use perspective, but I want the render to start from the front camera. So I can still initiate a front camera render while I'm still working in perspective view. But we're going to go back to side. We're going to right click and actually Sphinx and IPR. Oh, the IPR is not running. Good. We're going to right click and I'm just going to pick the side cam. And I can also cut down the resolution. So the big thing that's happening with the IPR render is it is going to give you the ability to produce faster renders, not only with less samples, because there are less samples in the render settings, but I can also cut the resolution down, which is really powerful because you don't need the entire, 2K or 4K image to know if the color is the right color. I could do that with a really low resolution 25% and probably get the gist of what's going on. Now I'm going to leave mine probably at the way it is because it seems to be running okay. But let's just initiate the render. We'll just pick the camera and you'll see that it does basically look like it's the same thing. So it's still going through the render process. But what's different is if I go to the light and change something, I'm going to turn off that temperature. Watch what happens. Do you guys see what just happened back here? The color changed. If I go to here and pick that same pink, see how it just restarted again? Like it started back over? Now the pink's there. So it's trying to update, and every time we change something, sometimes to a fault, because you'll click on an object and it's like, oh, you want to click on that? Like, let me start the render for you again. So it's a little tricky sometimes because you will almost end up causing the render to restart accidentally by doing something. Not a huge deal, but now I could focus on this light. Like I can kind of zoom in down here, and I could make it faster by saying, well, if I'm really only worried about the light, why the hell am I rendering the full image? Why don't I just zoom in there? We're going to do crop. I'm just going to drag over the section, and we're going to hit R. So crop is like defining a region, which is that button right there where I want to see the render. We're going to hit R. And see how as soon as I hit R, which is render again, it sees there's a crop drawn, and it's trying to render in that one section. And look at how fast it's just blowing through that thing. Right, and we're just going to go back to the move tool so I don't accidentally move the crop around. So now I can get really quick feedback because I'm isolating where it's calculating. So if I go back to, I think it's the backlight, we can go in there and like, all right, we're not feeling that. Let's just go through the hue. And we're watching this thing go through all of its calculations really quickly. Right? If we wanted to, we could even make it brighter. I'd be like, that's a interesting, I don't know what color, that would be like yellow green. I'm going to go here and crank the exposure up to 24, which is going to double it. And now we're making a brighter light. We could put lights in the front, get some headlight effects. I can go here and be like, all right, I'm digging that. Let's do the light in the back. We'll click on this guy. I don't know. That's probably doing more of like the rim effect here on the silhouette. Maybe we want to have that be an orange. So we'll just add some orange. And if I go back to crop, I can move that over here. And I can grab the corners and expand that out. Hit R to refresh the render. And we should be able to see, this one might be pretty faint. It might, yeah, that one's not really showing up a whole lot. But I think it's trying to create like an orange accent somewhere. Let me just crank this bad boy up. Where are you? Oh yeah, it's there. I can see it. Yeah, you're getting a hint of the orange. It's on the backside of the vehicle, so it's not really illuminating too much, but I think you guys kind of get the idea of what's going on. All right, so let's hit escape. We'll close out of the crop. We're just stopping the render. Come on. Oh, we go to crop and hit the X. There we go. So that's not too bad, right? I know it'll make more sense once you guys do it. Oh, I keep drawing the crop. That's one thing to be careful about is you'll kind of forget you're on the crop tool and you're going to start dragging, and before you know it, you're making crop windows all over the place. We'll go back to the move tool just so I can just move around the canvas. So that's all fine and dandy. Let's close out. Here is the other way that I do most of my renders for the videos in the classes. I like using the viewport. Now there are a couple caveats with this where you guys may decide you don't like using the viewport render, but this will turn the viewport to your renderer. It's really good if you don't need to move the camera because as soon as you move the camera, it's going to start kind of causing this to update. So let's leave the outliner open. I'm just going to go here. You can see this is set to 50%. Now I'm going to put it to 100 first because this is the default. I want you to see what's going to happen if I hit the blue R in the viewport. And this again is not currently in your Maya. This will all appear when you install RenderMan. Now you can tell the viewport is trying to render the image. Now look how slow it is. And there's a really big important reason why this is taking so long. And probably a good chunk of you are going to run into this problem. This is running, remember, it's a viewport render that's using whatever is in the viewport to calculate a really cheap image. The reason this is going to be dangerous for a couple of you is because we are using an Alienware laptop that has a 4K display. So you have to think about, if you look at the whole width of your monitor, if this is 4K across, what percentage of that is this little chunk right here within the resolution gate? And actually, it's even calculating stuff outside the resolution gate, technically. I have that little thing turned on, but it's doing the entire viewport, even though that stuff doesn't matter. So this is a extremely sharp, high-resolution image. It's probably even much sharper than the other one was from the image tool. So what I do a lot is if I'm still running a 4K resolution, and probably most of you have you guys actually changed your resolution on your laptop? Or are you all still running the default 4K? 4K is really pretty, by the way. Like I love using it for gaming. I still have it set to this way for most of my softwares, but there are a couple softwares where the 4K resolution does not work well. So you're doing like probably that 1920 res. Yeah, if you have dropped it down, this actually probably is not as big of an issue, and you may notice yours runs a lot faster. But for me, oh, it's interesting. Yeah, I may have to talk to you about that more in detail, David. But for me, since I'm using a 4K, what I'm doing is over here. That's why I put it to 50% or sometimes lower, because I want it to use a fraction of my 4K resolution instead of trying to produce a high quality image. Because as soon as you start getting these extremely rich, sharp renders like this, you're defeating the purpose of using the IPR because it's not going by quick. It's taking an eternity for me just to figure out if it's the right color of orange. So if I go to something like a 25, let's just stop the render for a second. We're going to go to 25%, and now I'm going to do it again. And look at the difference. Now I understand it's not pretty. It looks kind of like your crappy, almost like that pixelated JPEG sort of look, where it's not very good quality. But look at how fast this thing was updating. Like if I go in here and change the color, it's like the whole render is giving you instant feedback. And that's sort of this game that we're playing right now is we're sort of in this balance between when do we want to have a really nice render that takes a bit, and when we're still working on an activity, how do we find ways to optimize this so it's much, much faster and we can get quick feedback so you guys are able to work, change lights, change intensity, change material colors, and get exactly what you need very quickly so you can move on to other fun parts of the activity. Hopefully that makes sense the way I'm explaining it. Oh, we got Pager hanging out too. All the all-stars are hopping in here. I have 9 people. This is a new record for me, by the way. I've never had 9 people in a live session. So I'm about to pop open some champagne here. But we'll keep moving here. So that's the viewport. I do want to show you a couple of the issues with the viewport. And one really important thing I'm going to have you guys change in your render settings. I'm going to send out a video to everybody anyway, but since you guys are with me here, Yes, you're exactly right, Justin. Yeah, use lower render qualities like IPR, lower settings, lower resolution to get everything right. Even if it looks blurry, trust your instincts, and eventually you'll start creeping up the settings or just convert over to the high quality settings and just see what it looks like for the final. And there's other ways to, again, even with high quality settings, remember you can crop and render little specific regions to know if it's going to look good. You don't have to render the full image all the time to know if it's going to work. Um, but I want to show you a couple of the issues with the viewport that I've kind of run into. You know how you guys are like opening and closing the outliner? We all do this. I do it a lot. Watch what happens to the render when I close the outliner. Because the viewport changed and the size is different, it just restarted the render. Like, oh, I want to go back to the outliner, and it redid the render. And we'll go to the channel box, and it just redid the render again. So that's a little annoying. I haven't looked into it, but there may be some way to lock the viewport to a specific size, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah, that could get annoying for you guys. So be careful about that. Usually what I like to do is if I know I'm going to be looking at a render for a bit, I'll have all my panels open that I want, which is usually honestly just the attribute editor and probably the outliner, and I'll click on things I need through the outliner instead of trying to click on it in the viewport. Because if you guys are naming things properly and making lights, if it's already organized in here and you're being very thorough, I'm almost like OCD about this. But if you're doing a good job naming things, you don't need to be in the viewport with another camera trying to find stuff. You find it through your groups and your names. You change the settings over here. Like you go to the light, you find the settings. Like we'll do the front light this time, I guess. We're going to pick another weird color just so you can see it. What do you guys want to do? Green? Bluish, I guess? We'll do it in here, like a teal sign or something. Oh, good lord. That's something. We're changing color there, but as long as this is open, I can sort of hop between lights and just get as much cranked out as possible without this thing restarting on its own. So that's all that. The other thing I want to show you guys, it's really important about making the IPR render. And this, by the way, this is an IPR render because this is updating as you adjust stuff. This is also an IPR render. This is just an IPR render that happened to use the image tool as opposed to it being in the viewport. So I'm going to show you something super critical. And if you guys are watching this right now and following along, well, not following along, but just soaking it all in, I'm going to show you one thing I absolutely want you guys to change. Okay. So we are currently in the preferences, and as soon as you get RenderMan going, you're going to notice a new area shows up in the My Preferences for RenderMan. Amazing. It's the thing we're talking about. Now, up at the top, there's going to be a setting called Render Thread. So I'm going to put my mouse over this because it should pop up there's my little help menu, or my little pop-up info. The number of preview or IPR rendering threads. A negative number means to use all but that number of processors. So this is the amount of threads that we're using in the render. I do want to explain this to you because you haven't been in here yet or done any of this, will see that yours is defaulting at -2 for an IPR. And you're probably wondering what the hell that even means. So you're using, actually I need to, I can show you this in a second. It is, see if I can get in my device manager today. This thing has been locking me out recently. Oh, good. Windows is being pleasant. Okay, so I'm in the device manager, and I want you guys to understand what processor you guys have with your laptop. So you can look this up. Some of you may have already done this, so you might be very familiar with this processor, but we're going to check it out. This is the i9 8950HK. Okay, we'll probably end up on one of their pages that talks about it. Hopefully this is it. Yep. Okay, yep, this is it. So you can also kind of tell this by counting the number of these here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 12 threads total, and there's 6 cores. So this is a hexa-core processor that has 12 threads. It's using something called hyperthreading, which is something that's Intel uses. Think of it kind of like your processor has 6 brains, and those brains get split up into subbrains where they, like, each single brain can do 2 different tasks at once. So that's kind of where the 12 is coming from. It's just taking that and doubling it. So why does this all matter? It's because of this one setting in the preferences. This thing right here, because you have 12 threads total, and it's saying to use all but -2, this means as soon as you start an IPR render here or up here, 10 out of the 12 threads are dedicated to the render. Now watch, I might regret doing this. Oh geez, I hope this OBS doesn't freak out. I'm gonna keep the -2. We're gonna save it. I'm gonna start a render. Let's go to 50%. Let's all take a moment here and pray. Someone wave some sage in front of their laptop. Okay, it's gonna render, and I want to just try moving things around here. And of course, it's probably gonna be fine right now. Where's OBS? Where you at, OBS? Here's OBS recording our live session. Freaky. Of course, it's not that. Oh god, it's freaking out my secondary monitor. Oh geez. The chicken's been sacrificed. We're doing great here. That might be what's running smooth. But what's happening is 12 out of the 10, or sorry, 10 out of the 12 threads are being used for the render. So you have 2 threads, as a small percentage of your poor processor is left over for Maya, because Maya is something different. It's left over for Discord, OBS for me. I've got 2 Chrome browsers open with multiple tabs. Some of you guys might have Photoshop open. Windows, the operating system itself, uses up, processing power. And so you're down to such a small bit. Your cores, those 2 cores, are probably crying, trying to run everything else up by itself because the other 10 parts are all hanging out, having a blast rendering with RenderMan. And it might mean you get the render quick, but at what cost? And so we've had quite a few students that when they start rendering, because they have a lot of other stuff open, they notice that it basically becomes so slow that it's unusable, and they can't get, like, Maya will start pinwheeling, and they just get very frustrated. That's where that one setting comes in, because if you guys change it to -6, save it, I'm now saying I want 6 of the 12 to be with the IPR, and I'm leaving basically half of my processing power left over for all the other stuff. Yes, and so David's what he's talking about with the Easy Bake Oven. You might think we're being funny and joking. These poor laptops are going to sound like a jet engine's taken off. If you thought you've heard your fan kick on before by opening Photoshop, just wait till you start initiating an IPR render and you've got 12 Chrome tabs open and you've got Spotify running. Then if you live up north, you don't even need to honestly turn on your heat. Your laptop will be cooking. It's kind of funny too. I've told the story to some other people, but years ago when I was going through school, and I had turned my my bedroom into a render farm where I had it's an old AMD computer I'd built. Is honestly not very good, but I was rendering a lot of stuff on it, and it had actually got so hot, and our AC unit in the apartment was trying furiously in the middle of summer in Florida to keep up with this computer, and it had basically we had caused the pipe by the AC unit to form 2 inches of ice in the dead middle of summer in Florida because the AC unit had been going insane trying to keep up with how much heat my computer was cranking out. So for the sake of, really, that's what we're all getting. This is the real reason we're doing this whole lecture, is I'm trying to prevent you guys from destroying your poor AC unit. See how considerate we are? But yeah, we're over time a little bit here. We're at 7:07. I know we started a few minutes late. Hopefully this has been kind of informative for you guys, just so you can kind of see how the render works. I have the videos that talk about this in way more detail, so I want you guys to kind of check that out with 2.2, get the installation running. You'll see all the different ways we can change these guys to get the wireframe stuff set up. If I go to Visualizer, it'll turn to the wireframe pretty quick anyway. So there's one of the renders right there. So you're just changing something under render settings to get the wireframe to enable. Oh, and eventually, let me just save the render so you can see that real quick, because that is one thing we didn't do. Whoops, stop IPR. We're going to open this up again. All right, we're not going to let the render finish because it's going to take too long, but we're just going to hit escape. Eventually, we want to save it. When you guys save this thing, if you have the catalog open, be careful because the save session and export catalog probably sound like what you want to do. You actually want to do export file. And I'm going to click it, file, export file. We'll choose a desktop for now. We're going to do a PNG because that's what you guys are doing. Let's rename this to best render ever 1. And we're going to save it. I want you guys to see what the render looks like. Doesn't that look great? Look at the image tool. What happened? So it's not the same image. So a lot of you are going to run into this multiple times over the next few months. And this is a very easy fix. You're not doing anything wrong. At the top here in the image tool, you're going to hear me go on this little tangent about what this thing is doing. It's a super deep topic. It's called color spaces and color management and linear workflow. Honestly, I feel like it's an entire month's worth of content by itself, and we're going to cram it into about 5-minute video. But if you turn on the burn-in mapping on save, this will make sure your render looks correct when you save it. The image tool is sort of doing this thing behind the scenes that you're not aware of, where it's gamma correcting the render to look this way. And if that's not turned on, it doesn't keep that gamma correction. So as soon as you turn it on, the next time I save it with export file, we'll try this again, best render ever 2, and save it. And now, should be here in a second, there it is. Here's the first, that's the one that looks like the image tool. And it's not a big deal if you guys don't do that the first couple times. I'll just remind you about it, and as more of a, don't forget about this one thing. But after a while, if it's like a repetitive issue, I might take off a few points. Yeah, you're going to get more of that color space stuff when you get to compositing. I used to have a crazy lecture where I would talk about it for a previous class, but we might add some more stuff later on in like the dive deeper. Anyway, thanks guys. Appreciate everybody hanging out. Record turnout here. Hopefully this has been helpful for everybody and informative. I'm excited for you guys to dive in here and start doing this stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, but if not, thanks for showing up, and I will catch up with you guys later in the week.